Sansa Stark stood in the courtyard of the Eyrie, the lofty mountain fortress perched high above the Vale, and let the chill wind ruffle the furs around her neck. Where once she would have turned her head away from the cold, remembering the long nights of terror in King's Landing, now she welcomed the bracing touch of the mountain air. She had learned that a good lady, and even more so a good leader, must stand firm in every wind. As she gazed over the carved stone walkways and the distant, gleaming mountainsides, she allowed herself a moment of reflection on all that had come to pass, and all that she still needed to do. From her girlhood in Winterfell, Sansa had often dreamed of being a queen, or at least a lady worthy of songs and poems, an innocent fantasy shaped by tales of gallant knights and dancing ladies. Reality had shattered that dream and replaced it with something far harsher: brutal lessons in survival, deception, and the exercise of power. Yet from those trials Sansa had grown. She had learned the subtle arts of manipulation from Peter Baelish, the importance of trust from her family, and the cost of loyalty from the North itself. The Vale was now hers to guide, but it would never be a gentle stewardship. The lords of the Vale had their own wills and ancient traditions. The North, though reclaimed in name, still smarted from the wounds of war. The time had come for Sansa to unite these two bastions of power, Winterfell and the Eyrie, into a single force as unbreakable as the mountains themselves. She took one last look at the horizon before turning on her heel, robes swishing against the stone floor. Lord Yohn Royce awaited her inside the high hall. He stood near the moon door, that ominous portal through which so many had been flung to their deaths. Though she still felt a faint echo of dread each time she saw that gaping hole with the sky below, she kept her outward poise. If Littlefinger had taught her anything, it was how to hide fear behind a calm smile or a neutral mask. Royce inclined his head stiffly in greeting. "My lady." He was a stout man of traditional values, his iron-gray hair framing a face marked by deep lines of care and an unflinching sense of honor. She could guess he harbored doubts about being ruled by one so young. And not just young, she was still, to many, the daughter of Ned Stark, not truly a daughter of the Vale. Sansa acknowledged his courtesy with a graceful tilt of her head. "Lord Royce, I trust you have spoken with the other lords about our arrangements." Yohn Royce stood tall. "Aye, my lady. Some among the Vale lords are still uneasy, but they recall our late Lord Aaron's devotion to the Starks. They know we are bound by blood as well as by our shared enmities. The Vale shall stand behind you, and behind young Lord Robin's claim, so long as your leadership remains prudent." Though the mention of young Robin Arryn made Sansa's lips tighten, she did not let it show in her voice. Indeed, Robin was the formal lord of the Eyrie, but his fragile health and delicate mind left him ill-suited to rule. It was Sansa, in truth, who guided the Vale's affairs. Yet this arrangement was precarious, requiring constant reassurance to men like Royce that her decisions were for the good of all. "Then it gladdens me to hear it," she said, her tone as warm as she could make it. She placed one hand gently on his arm. "Your support is invaluable, Lord Royce, especially in these trying times. You have been a bulwark for the Vale. I hope you will continue as such when I present my next proposal." Royce's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your next proposal, my lady?" Sansa straightened, recalling how she had once found it difficult to speak in public or to lords of such rank. Now, she knew precisely how to hold herself, how to project command tempered by empathy. "Yes, I intend to call upon the Northern Lords to join with the Vale in a new alliance. The Vale will be safe, but only if the entire North is secure. We cannot remain isolated on our high perch, for times are changing, and the realm with it." She could sense the flicker of concern in Royce's eyes, a prudent man's caution. "And how exactly do you plan to strengthen these ties with the North, my lady?" Her voice was cool, measured. "We shall look to marriage alliances, trade routes, mutual defense pacts. More immediately, I wish to send supplies northward to help rebuild what was destroyed during the wars. In turn, I will ask for their loyalty, as well as their acceptance of me as Lady of the Vale and Lady of Winterfell, uniting two seats under one strong command." Royce's expression betrayed the slightest quiver of surprise. The notion of Winterfell and the Eyrie united under one lady was, indeed unprecedented in the long history of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet Sansa read in Royce's eyes more than surprise. She saw the calculations of a man who weighed tradition and the future in equal measure. The Vale's proud lords might balk at fully yielding to a Stark, but perhaps not so strongly if they believed she was guiding them into an era of peace and prosperity. "And you believe the Northern Lords will accept this?" Royce asked carefully. Sansa allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "They followed my brother, Robb Stark, when he was king in the north. They followed my cousin, Jon Snow, against the Boltons. They will follow a Stark, especially one who can offer the strength of the Vale at her back." Royce's mouth twitched slightly. "Then perhaps it is best that I speak to the other lords once again. You will want a formal meeting to proclaim this union, I assume." She nodded. "Yes, at the Eyrie first, then we shall call upon the Northern Lords to join us here. From there, I would travel to Winterfell to settle final matters. The journey must be made carefully. The roads can be treacherous." Royce bowed curtly. "Very well, my lady. I will make the necessary preparations." With that, he withdrew, leaving Sansa alone at the edge of the high hall, the cold wind whispering in from the moon door behind her. She stepped forward just enough to stare out at the sky. She remembered the day Peter Baelish had tried to push her aunt through that door. Aunt Lisa's screams still echoed faintly in the corners of her mind. But Sansa had learned to face nightmares head-on, for they never truly went away. Above the Eyrie spires, a falcon soared on a current of air. She watched it as it circled, free and fierce. Then she turned and walked to the door leading out of the hall. There was much to be done, and little time to bask in memory. In the Eyrie solar, she found Lord Robin Arryn, the sickly boy lord sitting with a cup of hot milk in trembling hands. His pale face and watery eyes regarded her with a mix of curiosity and half-fear. Ever since Littlefinger's death, the boy had clung to Sansa for guidance. More accurately, he clung to her as the only person left who seemed capable of caring for him without exploitation. "Sansa," Robin said faintly, summoning a smile. Are you well today?" She mustered a gentle tone for him. "Yes, Robin. Quite well." She moved to stand beside his chair. "How do you feel?" He shrugged. "Tired. It's cold here. Can we go back inside?" She repressed a small smile. They were inside, but it was always chilly in these heights, no matter the season. "We are inside," she reminded him softly, stroking his hair once as a kind older sister might. "But we can move you nearer the fire if you like." "Please," he said, already struggling to his feet. She helped him stand and guided him to a cushioned chair set near the blazing hearth. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, revealing the tapestry of House Arryn, a white falcon and crescent moon on a field of sky blue. Sansa took a seat across from Robin. She thought of how strange it was that this boy, younger than her, was her cousin by marriage, and her nominal liege if one followed Vale tradition. But that tradition had been carefully bent so that she, as his caretaker and the effective steward of the Vale, could hold the real power. "Robin," she began carefully, "we are going to host the Northern Lords soon." He peered at her, uncertain. "Why?" "Because we need to stand together," she explained gently. "The North has suffered, and so have we. Together we can help each other rebuild." He sipped his milk, letting the thought sink in. She could sense he was not truly following the details. Yet he had grown somewhat calmer since Littlefinger's death. "As long as they don't try to take the Eyrie away," he said with a child's honesty. She smiled. "They won't, Robin. This is your seat. No one will take it from you. We will just share our strength with them and, in return, they will share their loyalty with us." "All right?" he mumbled, squirming in his seat. "I trust you, Sansa." She inclined her head. "Thank you, Robin. I will not let you down." He gave her a small nod, and she saw his eyelids already drooping, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the milk. When he fell asleep, she draped a fur over him and rose, quietly leaving the solar. She had to prepare for a new meeting with the Vale Lords. That would be only the beginning of her grand plan. Winterfell beckoned, and with it the dream of uniting her father's seat with the lofty Eyrie, where the Arryn falcon soared side by side with the Stark direwolf. No foe could stand against them. All that remained was ensuring the great houses of the Vale, Royce, Waynwood, Corbray, Redfort, and the others gave their unflinching support. And, of course, the North's own great houses, Manderley, Glover, Serwyn, and the rest, must be made to see that Sansa Stark was no longer the frightened girl they once pitied, but a leader worthy of both their reverence and respect. In the following days, Sansa met with each of the Vale lords who had come to the Eyrie. They dined in the high hall, warmed by roaring fires against the mountain chill, where tables were laden with spiced wine, roast venison, and fresh bread. Each lord eyed Sansa with a mixture of curiosity and caution, testing the waters to see if she truly possessed the steel required to guide them. Lord Yohn Royce, as the voice of the older generation, was the hardest to impress. But Sansa, weaving half-truths and earnest passion together, appealed both to his sense of duty and his memories of how House Stark and House Arryn had once been allied through Jon Arryn's guardianship of Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon. She recalled the tales from her father's lips, how Ned and Robert grew up under Lord Arryn's roof, forging bonds that shaped the realm. Now, she proposed to renew those bonds in a new form, one that placed her at the head of the Vale's combined might. While her father's memory carried weight, Sansa knew it wasn't enough on its own to sway men who had weathered war after war, each new regime claiming to be the rightful rulers of Westeros. She had to make them believe in a future with her, so she spoke eloquently of the Vale's youth, its knights unbloodied by the War of the Five Kings, who might secure order in the north. She offered them the chance to be part of a new golden age, implying, if not outright promising, that the Vale would reap abundant rewards in trade and alliances once the north was stable. It was slow work, but her composure and sincerity began to wear down the Lord's initial resistance. Some came to appreciate how she had handled Robin Arryn's fragility. Others noted how she seemed more open-handed than Peter Baelish, who had often hidden every plan behind a sly smile. Sansa wielded a carefully balanced mixture of openness and mystery, revealing just enough of her goals to reassure them while leaving the sense that she had deeper wells of strategy at her disposal. Over a fortnight, the gatherings grew more intimate. She would host small suppers in her private solar, playing gracious hostess as she probed the Lord's positions and sought compromises. Lord Nestor Royce, a cousin of Yohn, seemed particularly keen on ensuring that trade routes expanded for the Vale's bountiful metals. She assured him that the North, needing new or to remake weapons and rebuild, would be eager buyers, especially if they could secure the Vale's caravans through the mountains. Lady Anya Waynwood, stern and matronly, needed only Sansa's promise that the Eyrie would remain loyal to the memory of the late Jon Arryn and keep faith with the old ways. Sansa spoke softly of how Ned Stark had always revered Jon Arryn as a second father and how she, as Ned's daughter, would do the same. When the last of these private councils concluded, she called for a public feast in the Eyrie's Grand Hall. Word spread among the knights of the Vale that Lady Sansa intended to announce something of great import. Wine flowed, minstrels played, and the braziers glowed. All eyes turned to Sansa as she rose, clad in a gown of deep gray trimmed with white fur, the stark colors subtly woven with Arryn blue in the embroidery at her sleeves. She lifted a silver goblet. "Lords and ladies of the Vale," she began, her clear voice carrying across the hall. "I stand before you as one who was born a Stark of Winterfell, yet I was harbored here at the Eyrie as a frightened girl fleeing the terrors of King's Landing. Since then, you have shown me the compassion and honor that the Vale is known for. Now we look to the future. The wars have ended, but the scars remain. The North lies in rubble, the Vale stands tall. I believe we can help each other, uniting our fortunes so that neither the storms beyond the mountains nor any new threats can divide us again. We must stand as one, for if the snows return, if any new dangers rise in Westeros, we cannot stand alone." She took a breath, locking eyes with Yohn Royce, then glancing at each of the other gathered lords. "I propose a formal alliance between the Vale and the North, sealed by my position as Lady of Winterfell and Lady of the Eyrie in all but name. Young Lord Robin will remain, of course, as Lord of the Eyrie, and I shall continue to assist him in ruling here. Together, we will see to the rebuilding of Winterfell and the prosperity of the Vale. This is my pledge. The gold and harvests of the Vale will find new markets in the north, and the north's farmlands, once recovered, will offer provisions and trade in return. Our knights shall be welcomed in each other's halls. We shall be two pillars of the same fortress, stronger together. For a tense moment, the hall was silent. Then Lord Royce rose from his seat. He was a stern figure, broad of shoulder, his cloak pinned with a sigil wrought of runic bronze. He scanned the crowd before speaking. My lady, we of the Vale have always prided ourselves on our independence, but we have also honored our bonds of friendship. Bonds first forged when the late Jon Arryn fostered Lord Stark of Winterfell. Seeing your determination to continue this alliance, and your rightful claim as Ned Stark's daughter, I pledge House Royce's support in this matter. The Vale stands beside you. He raised his own goblet and others followed suit. Cheers rippled among the knights. Some still looked uneasy, but no one openly voiced dissent. Sansa gave a nod of thanks, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She understood that forging an alliance was one thing, maintaining it would be another. But for now, she had her first victory. When the feast ended and the fires died down, Sansa stood on a walkway outside her chambers, the night sky blazing with stars. She felt the crisp mountain air on her cheeks as she stared across the dark peaks. The Vale was officially hers to guide, though Lord Robin held the name. Next, she would have to journey north, bringing with her a retinue of Vale knights and lords, to present her proposal to the northern houses. She hoped they would be more amenable to her than they had been to some of her family's other alliances in the past. Northerners could be stubborn, but so was she, and she knew the value of humility when needed. She let out a slow breath, recalling Winterfell's courtyards, the Godswood with its ancient heart tree, the chilled halls that had once rung with the laughter of her siblings. Much had changed since she'd last been there. She wondered how the North would receive her. Would they see her as a true Stark, or as one touched by the cunning of Littlefinger, stained by her time with the Lannisters? She would have to show them her loyalty in deeds, not words. A distant screech cut through the night. A falcon, somewhere along the heights. She closed her eyes and imagined the snow-capped mountains giving way to the plains and hills that stretched northward, all the way to Winterfell. It felt as though half her heart belonged in the wolf's den, while the other half was now carved into the very stone of the Eyrie. She imagined bridging that distance, forging something new. Below, torches flickered in the courtyard. She wondered if the Vale's soldiers were ready for the crossing. The mountain path down from the Eyrie was perilous, the roads narrow and riddled with dangers, but they would travel in force. No ordinary bandits or shadowcats would threaten them. Sansa suspected the real tests would be at her father's castle. Turning from the parapet, she made her way back inside. She passed Robin's door, where guards stood watch, then slipped into her own bedchamber. A fire crackled in the hearth. She sank onto a cushioned chair, pulled off her gloves, and held her hands out to the warmth. The flame reminded her of the old hearth in Winterfell's great hall, where she used to sit with her mother and sister, listening to old Nan's stories. Now only memories of that innocent time remained. She was no longer innocent, and the stories had become her life. In the days that followed, Sansa oversaw the gathering of supplies for the long journey north. Horses were shoed, wagons loaded with grain and metals for trade, and banners prepared. She selected a contingent of Vale knights, 200 strong, to accompany her, each sworn to House Arryn, but effectively under her command. Lord Royce, of course, insisted on bringing some of his men. She did not object, sensing that he wanted to keep an eye on everything personally. Lady Waynwood contributed a few mounted men-at-arms as well. By the time they set forth from the Eyrie, the column was impressive, though Sansa made sure it was not so large as to appear threatening to the north. She wanted to project strength, not conquest. Their procession wound its way down the perilous Giant's Lance, passing through the Gates of the Moon, where lesser lords kept watch for any travelers who might come to or from the Eyrie. Robin Arryn, left behind in the fortress under a careful watch of maesters and loyal guards, had clung to her hand at the final farewell, begging her not to stay away too long. She promised him she would return soon with good news. His big, nervous eyes made her recall a time when she, too, had been naive and fearful. Now, she could only give him a soft, reassuring smile. Once they reached the Vale proper, the roads grew broader, and the mountain air was less harsh. Their column passed through rich farmland and rolling hills. Sansa noted how the fields were well tended. The farmers paused to gape at the banners of House Eyrie fluttering alongside a lone direwolf banner she had insisted they carry. People whispered, pointing out Sansa's carriage or the group of mounted knights in bright steel. Some cheered, remembering how Ned Stark was once beloved even beyond the north. Others simply stared in awe, uncertain what this spectacle meant. They made camp near the coast, where gulls screeched overhead and the salt breeze teased at Sansa's hair. She strolled through the camp, acknowledging knights and soldiers who bowed as she passed. She was careful to offer smiles, small words of encouragement. Building loyalty was as important as forging alliances with lords. She knew from bitter experience that knights and soldiers would fight all the harder for a leader they respected and believed in. Lord Royce joined her near the edge of the campsite, overlooking a pale, moonlit beach. "My lady," he said, nodding in greeting. "We've made good time. If the weather holds, we should reach the Bloody Gate soon." Sansa turned toward the distant silhouette of jagged cliffs. The Bloody Gate was the Vale's natural fortress, a choke point that protected them from invasion. She remembered passing through it with Peter Baelish, so many years ago, her mind clouded with dread and confusion. Now she approached it with purpose, bearing the standard of a new alliance. "Good. Once we're past the Bloody Gate, we'll head north." She paused, scanning the horizon. "Tell me, Lord Royce, do you think the North will accept me as lady of both the Eyrie and Winterfell?" He pressed his lips together. "The North is proud. They'll want to see that you're still a true Stark in your heart. You may have to reassure them of that. Some might question your time away or the influences that shaped you. But I think if anyone can sway them, it's you." She nodded, grateful for his honesty. The stars shimmered on the dark water beyond. "Thank you," she said quietly. The next day they set out early. The clang of armor and the jingle of bridles accompanied them up the rocky, winding path that led to the Bloody Gate. Sunlight cut through the mist, revealing the imposing stone ramparts that guarded the pass. Banners of House Royce and Eyrie waved from the high walls. When they drew close, a garrison captain came forth, saluting with spear in hand. Lord Royce spoke to him in a low voice, presenting Sansa as Lady Stark and caretaker of the Vale, and the gates swung open. They passed through in a slow procession, the knights' horses stamping on the stone bridge that spanned the ravine. A swirl of chill wind howled below, reminding them all of the formidable natural defenses. Once beyond the gate, the road tilted northward, weaving through lower mountains until they reached the countryside that connected the Vale to the riverlands and the far north. In the following weeks, their journey was marked by varied weather, rainstorms that soaked them, then days of clear skies that hastened their pace. Sansa rode in a modest carriage for part of the way but often chose to ride alongside her guard on horseback. She wanted to show the men that she was not some pampered lady but rather a Stark, strong enough for the road. Her thighs ached from hours in the saddle, but she kept her back straight, eyes forward. They passed the ruins of small holdfasts, remnants of the wars that had raged across the land. Sometimes, they stopped to speak with local folk, many of whom wore threadbare clothes and looked upon the knights' shining armor with a wary gaze. Sansa would have bread or dried meat distributed, and she took care to ask about their hardships. She'd glean any bit of knowledge about the North's mood that she could. Some recognized her name, recalling Eddard Stark's daughter, and murmured blessings or thanks. Others seemed uncertain, as though they feared any new power that might claim them. At last, they crossed the Neck, that marshy stretch of land where the Crannogmen dwelled, and the weather turned colder. The air had a sharper bite now, reminiscent of the windy heights of the Eyrie but imbued with the raw scent of pine and damp earth. On the horizon loomed the first hints of the North's vast forests. Sansa's heart quickened at the familiar smell, the sense of returning to her roots. She had been a child the last time she'd come this way. Now she returned as a woman grown, leading a column of knights under her banner. How different the world had become. After days of travel through the tall, solemn pines, they approached Moat Cailin, the ancient fortress that guarded the causeway into the north. Much of it lay in ruins, its towers crumbling. What soldiers remained there now served the Starks who had reclaimed the seat after the wars. As Sansa's group came into view, horns sounded from the ramparts. A handful of Northmen emerged, clad in furs and boiled leather. They seemed tense at the sight of so many Vale knights, but when Sansa approached, cloaked in direwolf gray and Arryn blue, they knelt or bowed, each in his own manner of respect. "My lady," said a grizzled soldier with a limp, "you're a welcome sight. We had word you might be coming, but didn't expect such a retinue." He eyed the ranks of knights warily. Sansa gently reassured him. "There is no threat here, only allies. I have returned home and bring with me loyal men of the Vale to ensure peace." He inclined his head. "Then welcome, my lady. We'll open the gates for your party. Do you plan to continue straight on to Winterfell?" She nodded, though a small knot of nerves twisted in her gut at the thought. "Yes, we won't linger. Winterfell awaits, and I've tarried too long already." The column pressed through Moat Cailin, the old stones echoing with the horses' hooves. Sansa could see the scars of battle in the shattered walls and blackened timbers. Weeds crept over broken masonry. Moat Cailin had stood for thousands of years as the sentinel of the north, but war had left it battered. She thought of how the rest of the north must be faring, Winterfell included. They rode for days more, passing the bar Rolands, crossing rivers made swift by autumn rains, and at last glimpsed the tall, hard lines of Winterfell's walls rising in the distance. The fortress was being rebuilt. New timbers, stones, and scaffolding indicated ongoing construction. Smoke curled from the great chimneys, and even from afar, Sansa's heart twisted with memory. She recalled those towering walls as a place of comfort, the backdrop to her childhood games and lessons. Now they seemed different, simultaneously familiar and alien. As they approached the gates, horns sounded within Winterfell. The gates were open, revealing the courtyard bustling with activity. Northern soldiers in Stark livery stood at attention, their breath steaming in the cold air. The direwolf banners, dark gray on white, fluttered overhead. Sansa urged her horse forward, flanked by Lord Royce and a handful of Vale knights. She could see faces peering from windows, stable hands standing to watch, uncertain of these southern-looking warriors. Inside the courtyard, she dismounted carefully, legs stiff. A hush fell. She took a moment to survey the surroundings. The old well, the repaired stables, the half-finished keep where a new tower was rising. Ghosts of her past seemed to drift among the living, filling her with an ache. She turned as a figure stepped forward. It was Lord Wyman Manderly, looking as robust as ever, though streaks of white in his hair suggested the toll of hard years. He bowed his head. "Lady Sansa, Winterfell welcomes you home." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, my lord. It's good to be home." He glanced at the Vale knights behind her. "We have heard word that you come not only as a Stark but as Lady of the Vale. Many are eager to hear the details of your intentions." She inclined her head. "They shall hear them soon. For now, let us rest from the journey. I look forward to speaking with you and the other northern lords about what I bring." Manderly nodded, gesturing for her to follow. "Of course, my lady. We've prepared rooms for you. My men will see that your company is well cared for." Sansa turned to Lord Royce. "Have the men set up camp outside the walls, if there's not enough lodging. I want them comfortable but not imposing on Winterfell's hospitality." Royce gave a curt nod. "As you wish, my lady." With that, she followed Manderly across the courtyard, her fur-trimmed cloak trailing behind. She noted the great keep, still bearing the scars of Theon Greyjoy's attack and the Boltons' occupation, but partially rebuilt. Despite the changes, the courtyard smelled of hay, horses, and roasting meat from the kitchens. Smelled, in a strange way, like home. Manderly led her inside, where the corridors were lit by smoky torches. Passing servants paused to gape at her, then hurried about their tasks. Some bowed, remembering her as the Stark girl from years ago. She offered faint smiles in return, too overcome to speak. Finally, they reached a suite of rooms that had once been reserved for visiting dignitaries. Manderly gestured politely. "Please, my lady, here you'll have warmth and privacy. My daughter Willa will attend you soon if you wish. She's quite eager to meet you." Sansa managed a smile. "That would be lovely. Thank you, Lord Manderly." He bowed again and withdrew, leaving her with two of her attendants. She stepped inside, noting the freshly hung tapestries and the fire crackling in the hearth. The room felt chilly despite the blaze, a reminder that Winterfell's thick stone walls needed time to store warmth. She moved closer to the flames, rubbing her hands. One of her maids, a young Vale girl named Alora, set about unpacking a trunk. "Shall I draw a bath, my lady?" "Yes, please," Sansa said softly. She felt the dust of travel in her hair and on her skin, and she longed to wash it away. While the bath was being prepared, Sansa took a moment to walk around the room, trailing her fingers across the carved wooden furniture. It seemed the North was still healing, trying to piece itself back together in the aftermath of war. She recalled how the Boltons had occupied Winterfell, how Ramsay's cruelty had tainted these halls. An involuntary shiver rippled through her. She had escaped that nightmare, but Winterfell itself had not. Perhaps some ghost still lingered. Yet here she was, returned of her own free will, bearing the power of the Vale. She would use that power to ensure no Bolton or any other tyrant could ever claim her home again. After bathing, she changed into a gown of dark gray wool, accented with pale blue embroidery. She braided her hair in a northern style, letting a portion fall in a long tail down her back, reminiscent of the way she'd worn it as a child, yet with a more mature sophistication. When Willa Manderly arrived, a plump girl of perhaps 16 with bright eyes and an eager smile, Sansa greeted her kindly. "Lady Sansa," Willa said, curtsying awkwardly. "I'm so pleased to meet you. My father has told me stories of how your father and my grandfather were great friends." Sansa smiled, remembering that the Manderlys had always been loyal to House Stark. "Thank you for coming, Willa. I remember your grandfather, Wylis Manderly. He was always very generous. How fares your family now?" Willa shifted her weight, a flicker of sadness passing over her face. "We are well, though our losses in the wars were heavy. My father says we must look to the future. I hope we can do that together." Sansa nodded. "So do I. If we unite the North and the Vale, we can protect one another. I'd like to speak with your father and all the Northern Lords soon." Willa's eyes brightened. "I believe they're preparing a gathering in the Great Hall for tomorrow evening. My father wanted you to have time to rest, but, well, he's very eager for news." Sansa thanked her for the information, then dismissed her with a friendly farewell. Alone again, Sansa gazed into the hearth. Tomorrow, she would stand before the assembled lords of the North, many of whom had once bent the knee to her cousin, Jon Snow. She wondered if Jon would return, or if he would remain in the far north with the free folk as rumored. Either way, it fell to her to secure the Stark's legacy and ensure Winterfell's position. When dawn broke, a thin dusting of snow covered the courtyard. Servants moved briskly, clearing the steps and laying straw to prevent slipping. Sansa donned a cloak of thick gray fur over her gown and went out to walk among the familiar stones of Winterfell. She passed the old armory, the training yard where she had once watched Arya shoot arrows and clash with wooden swords. A pang of longing for her sister, for her brothers, seized her. So many had been lost, scattered. She thought of Bran and Rickon, of their rumored fates, of Arya's uncertain wanderings. There was so much sorrow in these walls, yet she tried to find comfort in the fact that she was here to restore some measure of hope. By midday, the great hall was prepared for the meeting. Long tables stretched out, and a fire in the central hearth blazed. Lords from across the north arrived, each heralded by a swirl of cold air and an exchange of greetings. Sansa sat at the head of the hall, on a raised dais, beneath the Stark banner that draped the wall. To her right was Lord Royce, representing the Vale, and to her left sat Lord Manderley, representing the North's Old Guard. Other notable figures included Lord Glover from Deepwood Motte, Lady Barbary Dustin from Barrowton, and a handful of lesser lords and their retinues. Some seats stood empty, House Umber, House Karstark, and a few others who had been nearly wiped out in the wars. Once everyone was settled, Sansa stood. Her gaze swept over the audience, all those keen eyes set on her. She saw curiosity, wariness, and in some cases, relief. She had to remind herself to breathe steadily. These were her people, yet they needed to be convinced that she could lead. "My lords and ladies of the North," she began, her voice unwavering. "I am Sansa Stark, daughter of Lord Eddard Stark, and I have returned to Winterfell at last. Much has changed since I left here as a girl. War has ravaged our lands, claiming many lives, but the North endures as it always has. We have survived, though battered and wounded. Now we must heal and stand strong once more. I come before you not just as the daughter of Ned Stark, but also as the caretaker of the Vale, sworn to protect young Lord Arryn and guide the knights who serve him. The Vale has long held itself apart, safe behind its mountains, but that time is over. The threats we've faced have shown us that isolation breeds vulnerability. And so, I bring the Vale's knights and resources to join with the North. My aim is to unite our forces and bring prosperity to both. In exchange, I ask that you recognize my authority as Lady of Winterfell and Lady of the Vale, forging a formal alliance that benefits us all. We can share trade and resources, protect one another, and ensure that never again will a Bolton or a Lannister or any outsider trample upon our homes. If the North stands with the Vale, no foe will dare challenge us." She paused, letting her words settle. Manderley coughed gently, then stood, addressing the hall. "Lady Sansa speaks truth. House Manderley has always been loyal to House Stark. We know how the realm has changed. Trade routes, alliances, these are the ways of the present, not just swords and bows. I, Wyman Manderley, support her proposal. Let House Manderley stand with House Stark, as we have for generations." A murmur swept the hall. Lord Glover rose next, a lean man with a thoughtful face. "We at Deepwood Motte suffered much. We lost our hold to the Ironborn, then endured the Boltons. We will not lightly place our faith in new arrangements. But if the Vale can truly offer us the support we need to rebuild, then I am inclined to hear more." Sansa met his gaze. "Lord Glover, I understand your caution. I have instructed that the Vale's supplies and skilled laborers be made available to help rebuild keeps like yours, in exchange for fair trade agreements. I do not come empty-handed." She beckoned to Lord Royce, who stood and laid out some of the details. Shipments of metal for forging new tools and weapons, grain to supplement poor harvests, as well as potential trade connections with the Vale's merchants who could carry goods safely across the region. Glover listened, arms crossed, his eyes flicking between Royce and Sansa. Finally, he inclined his head in acceptance. Then Lady Barbary Dustin rose, sharp-eyed and regal in her own right. "We have cause to be wary of the Vale," she said. "We remember how Peter Baelish meddled in the affairs of the North. Can you assure us you do not follow his path, Lady Sansa?" Sansa kept her voice calm, though the mention of Peter unsettled her. "Littlefinger is dead. His schemes died with him. I learned much from him, good and ill, but I do not intend to be his mirror. My loyalty is to the North and to the Vale, not to personal ambition. I stand here for our people, not for the Iron Throne, not for gold, and certainly not for any Southern Game of Thrones." Lady Dustin surveyed her a moment longer before giving a curt nod. "Then let the Dustin lands support this alliance, so long as it remains true to your words." One by one, the lords voiced their positions, some offering immediate support, others hesitating until Sansa promised them more details or gave them personal assurances. She answered each question patiently, relying on both her knowledge of the North's traditions and her more recent understanding of political maneuvering. The gathering lasted well into the evening, with food and drink passed around as the details were hammered out. When at last the final objections were quelled, Lord Manderley rose, a broad grin lighting his face. "It seems we have consensus, then. The North shall stand behind Lady Sansa Stark, and we shall welcome the Vale as our allies. Let us drink to the unification of Winterfell and the Eyrie." Cheers and applause echoed through the hall. Servants hurried to refill cups with ale and wine. Sansa raised her own goblet, scanning the room. She felt a surge of gratitude and triumph. The North was hers again, hers to protect, with the power of the Vale as her shield. They drank, talked, and the tension gradually eased into camaraderie. Sansa allowed herself to breathe, finally, as lords who had once been uncertain now came to speak with her more amiably, to ask after her welfare, and to discuss what was needed for their lands. She found herself making mental notes of each request. Grain for one, a small garrison for another, the dispatch of knights to quell lingering banditry in a third. It was an endless list, but she knew that fulfilling these promises was the key to solidifying her rule. After the feast, Sansa stepped outside into the courtyard for a moment of quiet. Snow drifted gently from the sky, settling on her cloak. The chill air made her cheeks pink, but she welcomed it. The courtyard was largely empty, save for a few guards making their rounds. She tilted her head back, letting a flake melt on her cheek. The sense of being home, truly home, overwhelmed her. In that moment, she remembered her father's comforting words, the warmth of her mother's embrace, the echoes of Bran's laughter as he climbed the walls, Arya's brash challenges, Robb's princely confidence, Rickon's small hand in hers. Those days were gone, but perhaps she could honor them by guiding the North into a safer, stronger future. And she was not alone. Though her family was scattered or dead, she had found allies, friends even in the Vale. Lord Royce was tough and loyal in his own way, Lady Waynwood a stalwart defender of her cause, Nestor Royce a shrewd trade negotiator. They had pinned their hopes on her, and she would not disappoint them. A soft sound behind her made her turn. It was Willa Manderley, her hood pulled up against the snow. "My lady, are you well?" Sansa gave a gentle smile. "I am, thank you. Just taking in the moment." Willa nodded. "It's a big day for the North. And for you. Father said the formal oaths will be sworn tomorrow in the Godswood." Sansa's breath caught slightly. The Godswood, that ancient heart tree with its carved face. A place where the old gods watched over House Stark for centuries. "Yes," she murmured. "That's fitting. Let the old gods bear witness to this new bond." Willa's eyes shone with excitement. "Then I'll see you there, my lady. Good night." She curtsied and departed, leaving Sansa alone once more with the drifting snow. Sansa looked up at the ramparts, where a lone torch glowed, reflected by the blank whiteness falling from the sky. She thought of how the union of Winterfell and the Eyrie would reshape the North's political landscape. No longer would the Starks need to fear southern interference, so long as the Vale's knights stood by them. Perhaps one day, the alliance would extend to further realms, forging a new order in Westeros. But for now, her focus was on the North. She had hammered out an agreement, but alliances were fragile. She would have to travel among the holds, ensure each house felt heard and valued, deliver the help she promised. She might have to conduct a marriage pact or two, possibly uniting a northern lord with a Vale lady, or vice versa. That, she knew, was the lifeblood of alliances in Westeros. Tomorrow, she would stand beneath the heart tree, surrounded by the lords of the North and the knights of the Vale, and she would pledge to protect them all. She vowed to do better than any who came before her, to preserve the North's traditions while embracing the Vale's strengths. She thought of Peter Baelish, a fleeting shadow in her mind, and resolved once more never to become like him. She would not sow chaos for personal gain. She would lead with the memory of her father's honor guiding her steps, tempered by the caution and cunning she had learned through suffering. In the hush of Winterfell's courtyard, she felt a stirring in her heart, a sense of destiny that both excited and terrified her. She was forging a new path, something not even her father could have foreseen. The Stark direwolf and the Arryn falcon, side by side. The mountains and the snows. The Eyrie and Winterfell united under one lady. She closed her eyes, allowing herself just one moment to dream of what might come. Perhaps she would see the North blossom with trade and prosperity, see the children of the next generation grow up without the constant threat of war. Perhaps, one day, she would marry not for obligation but for love, though she knew well how marriage was often a tool in the Game of Thrones. Still, hope flickered like the warm glow of a hearth fire. When she opened her eyes, she felt calmer, more resolved. The vow she would make tomorrow would be more binding than any she had ever made. She would pledge to the old gods that she would protect the North with all her strength and intellect, and that she would honor the faith and loyalty of the Vale. And in doing so, she would forge something entirely new in a land that had always been torn by old feuds and grudges. If she succeeded, she might change the course of Northern history forever. That night, she slept in her old bedchamber, one that had been hurriedly refurbished, though the walls still bore faint scorch marks from the Bolton occupation. The hush of Winterfell at night, broken only by the crackling of the fire, lulled her into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of swirling snow, of a falcon perched on a branch beside a howling direwolf. She dreamed of faces in the darkness, her father, mother, brothers, sister, watching her with tender eyes, urging her onward. And when she awakened at dawn, the dream lingered in her mind, filling her with a strange peace. The ceremony in the Godswood was a modest affair by Southern standards, but deeply meaningful to those who shared the faith of the old gods. The lords of the North, bundled in furs, gathered around the ancient heart tree, its red leaves stark against the white of fresh snow. The face carved into the trunk looked on impassively. Sansa stood at the base of the tree, the swirling flakes settling on her braided hair, feeling as though her ancestors were indeed watching through that weirwood visage. The men and women of the Vale stood somewhat apart, observing with curious respect. Lord Royce had removed his helm in deference. Lord Manderly spoke the words of the old vow, calling upon the old gods to witness the pledge of loyalty between House Stark of Winterfell and the Lords of the North, and House Arryn of the Vale, represented by Sansa Stark. One by one, the Northern Lords stepped forward to lay their hands upon the heart tree, sealing their loyalty to Sansa as Lady of Winterfell. Then Lord Royce, in the name of Robin Arryn, placed his hand upon the carved face, pledging the Vale's support. Finally, Sansa pressed her palm to the cold, carved wood, feeling the grain of the ancient tree beneath her skin. The eyes of the face seemed to bore into her, red sap tears running down the trunk. She spoke in a soft but clear voice, carrying across the silent glade. Before the old gods, I, Sansa Stark, pledge to protect and guide the North and the Vale, to uphold justice and honor, and to defend these lands from all who would harm them. As I unite Winterfell and the Eyrie, so I unite the wolf and the falcon in shared purpose. May the gods, old and new, judge me if I fail. Snow whispered around them, a hush of awe in the air. Then Lord Royce bowed, and the Northern Lords followed suit. Sansa lowered her hand, heart pounding with the gravity of it all. In that moment, she felt an almost physical weight settle on her shoulders, the weight of two realms' hopes and fears. Yet she also felt a surge of pride and determination. She would not falter. When they emerged from the Godswood, their breath visible in the frigid air, small smiles and hushed conversation replaced the solemnity. A new bond had been forged, and the North had accepted it. The question now was how this bond would shape events to come. If Southern powers learned that the North and the Vale had unified under a single leader, they might look upon Sansa with suspicion or even fear. Yet that might be an advantage, deterring any thoughts of invasion. She led the group back to the Great Hall, where a simpler feast awaited: hot spiced wine, thick stews, hearty bread. She made sure everyone was served, from the highest lord to the humblest retainer. Then she found a moment's peace by the fireside, accepting congratulations from Lord Glover, nods of approval from Lady Dustin, and an enthusiastic pledge from a younger lord who spoke of old loyalty to House Stark. Lord Royce approached, a faint smile on his usually stern face. "Well, my lady, the vow is made. I suppose that settles things in the North." Sansa inclined her head. "Indeed it does, though the true work begins now, making good on my promises, ensuring both realms benefit from this union. I'll be traveling to your seat in Runestone, to others in the Vale, and to the major seats of the north. Coordination will be key. He nodded. You've grown quite adept at this, Lady Sansa. She caught the hint of respect in his voice. It warmed her more than the fire. I've had good tutors, she replied softly, though she did not name Peter Baelish. And I've learned from the best of the North, my father included. Royce set a gauntlet hand on the table. The best is yet to come, I think. If we stand firm, we can ensure lasting peace in these lands. The Vale has never been so closely tied to the North, not even in Jon Arryn's days. We tread new ground, my lady. She sipped her wine, gazing at the dancing flames. Yes, we do, but new ground can be fertile if we tend it well. I mean to see that it flourishes. He nodded, then moved off to speak with Lord Glover. Sansa lingered by the fire, her thoughts turning to the future. Would the other kingdoms take notice? Dorne, the Reach, the Westerlands each had its own concerns. If any sought to challenge her authority, would the combined might of the North and the Vale be enough? She believed so, especially once they'd rebuilt their armies and fortifications. For now, though, she did not seek to expand beyond these realms. Her focus was on securing her people's well-being. That evening, she walked once more through the corridors of Winterfell, tracing old paths. She ended up near the crypts, those silent depths that held her ancestors' statues. The caretaker's lantern flickered, revealing ghostly shapes of long-dead Starks. She stepped inside, walking slowly among the rows of stone effigies. Her father's statue stood tall among them, his features carved with a somber dignity. She felt tears prick her eyes as she stood before him, remembering his warm voice, his gentle wisdom. I hope I've made you proud, she whispered, voice echoing in the cold crypt. I hope I'm doing right by our name. In the silence that followed, she imagined his voice answering, telling her she had done well to protect their home. She closed her eyes, letting the memory comfort her. Then, she turned and left the crypts, returning to the light. There was much to do, many roads to travel. But for tonight, she was at peace. Winterfell was once more under Stark guidance, and the Vale's falcon soared with the direwolf. In the weeks and months that followed, Sansa busied herself in the tasks of governance. Messengers traveled back and forth between the Eyrie and Winterfell, carrying letters sealed with a direwolf and falcon sigil, signifying the new union. Lords of the Vale wrote of the improved trade prospects, while northern lords sent gratitude for the influx of supplies. Skilled artisans from the Vale came north to help with the rebuilding, forging strong partnerships with local builders. Sansa insisted that any Vale merchant caravans receive safe passage through the north, and in return, northern goods, furs, timber, pelts, flowed southward. She oversaw the training of a joint guard in Winterfell, a combination of northern soldiers and Vale knights who learned to respect each other's tactics. There were some initial scuffles. Northerners teased the Vale men for their fancy armor, while the knights from the Vale sneered at the Northmen's rough manners. But gradually, under Sansa's watchful eye, they found common ground. She had them train in the courtyard, encouraging tournaments that blended Vale chivalry with northern grit. Her presence was requested at White Harbor, so she traveled with a small retinue, greeting Lord Manderley in his grand city by the sea. She marveled at the bustle of trade, the ships coming and going. She suggested ways to integrate the Vale's shipping routes, forging an even larger network of commerce. Lord Manderley was delighted. He hosted lavish feasts for her, proclaiming House Stark's renewed strength to all who would hear. From there, she visited the Glovers, ensuring Deepwood Mott received the needed supplies for reconstruction. She spent time speaking with the local smallfolk, listening to their concerns about wolves in the forest and leftover pockets of banditry. Satisfied that her men could help quell those threats, she moved on. She sent envoys to House Serwyn, House Tallheart, House Reed, forging or renewing each bond meticulously. Her time in the Vale had taught her that every house, no matter how small, was significant in the grand tapestry of alliances. Meanwhile, she received reports from Lord Royce back in the Eyrie. Robin Arryn remained sheltered, still frail but content with the knowledge that Sansa was managing the Vale's affairs. Sansa sometimes felt a twinge of guilt for not being there personally, but she reminded herself that ensuring Winterfell's stability was equally crucial. She wrote letters to Robin, assuring him she would return soon and that she cared for him as family. With each passing moon, rumors spread across the realm of the formidable union taking shape in the north. Some whispered that Sansa Stark might declare herself queen in the north and the Vale, forging a new monarchy. Others speculated that she might align with the Targaryen queen if any Targaryen forces remained in the south. Yet Sansa had no desire for the Iron Throne. Her father's lessons, and all her bitter experiences, had taught her the perils of that seat. She only sought to guard her own lands and people. One crisp afternoon, as she returned to Winterfell from yet another journey to an outlying holdfast, she found a raven waiting with a message. Breaking the seal, she saw it was from the Riverlands, specifically from Edmure Tully at Riverrun. He wrote of the continued bandit problems plaguing the Trident and the uncertainty of who truly held power in the Crownlands now that the wars had quieted but not concluded in any formal peace. He asked if the rumors were true. Had Sansa truly united the North and the Vale? If so, might they consider extending some help to the Riverlands, her mother's home? She read the words carefully, a mixture of compassion and caution stirring within her. The Riverlands had suffered horribly. They were her mother's people, and she felt a kinship with them. Yet she had to think of her own realms first. She penned a reply, expressing sympathy and a willingness to discuss mutual aid. But she did not commit the North or the Vale to any further entanglement. At the same time, letters arrived from the Westerlands, from those who now controlled Casterly Rock after the Lannisters' downfall. They, too, sought to gauge the intentions of the newly empowered Sansa Stark. She responded with polite neutrality, stating that she held no quarrel with them so long as they did not threaten her lands. She knew how quickly old enmities could flare, and she was determined to avoid any new wars if possible. Seasons began to shift. The bright days of late autumn turned into the chill of early winter, yet the north did not freeze as harshly as it once had, thanks to the thinning of the winters after the Great War. Sansa prepared Winterfell for the cold months, stockpiling food in the granaries. She also saw to it that Vale caravans continued their deliveries. The nights grew longer, the days shorter, and the walls of Winterfell seemed to stand firm, as if proud to be truly under Stark rule again. Walking through the courtyard one evening, she paused to watch a small group of Vale knights practicing with northern archers. The sound of arrows thudding into targets mingled with the clang of steel on wood. The men, once strangers, now joked and encouraged each other. It struck her as a small miracle. She thought of how her father would have smiled to see such unity. Perhaps this was how the Seven Kingdoms were meant to be, a patchwork of different ways and customs, yet bound by mutual respect and reliance. She climbed the steps to the battlements, from where she could see beyond the walls. Snow blanketed the landscape, the forest a distant dark line against the gray sky. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the winter town, where small folk prepared for winter, bolstered by the supplies the Vale had sent. A hush fell over her as she took it all in, the stark beauty of the north in winter. Lord Royce joined her at the parapet, his breath a mist in the cold air. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" he said, his usually gruff tones softened by wonder. "The north in winter," she nodded. "It reminds me of why I wanted this union, so we never have to face the cold alone." He inclined his head. "Wise words, my lady." They stood in companionable silence for a time. Then he spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "What's next, Lady Sansa? Now that the North and the Vale are bound, do you intend to push further? The Riverlands, perhaps?" She turned to look at him. "I've had letters from Edmure Tully, but I'm not eager to stretch our forces too thin. We need to solidify what we have. The small folk in both the Vale and the North deserve peace after so many years of turmoil. Yet I won't ignore my mother's homeland if they truly need help. It must be done carefully, though, one step at a time." Royce nodded. "Understood. I'll stand ready to lend my aid, should you choose that path." She gave him a slight smile. "Thank you, Lord Royce. For now, Let's ensure that this alliance becomes unbreakable. We have lords to placate, roads to maintain, trade to expand. If we succeed, the rest of Westeros might see that a new age can begin without more bloodshed. Royce clasped his hands behind his back, his breath fogging in the chill. "Then you are truly your father's daughter," he said quietly. "Honorable but tempered by caution. I believe you'll lead us well." Sansa lowered her gaze, touched by the rare compliment. "I hope so. Every day I think of what he would have done. And every day I realize I must rely on what I've learned, both from him and from others. I walk a path that neither he nor anyone else laid for me." He nodded in understanding, and they turned to gaze over the snowy expanse again. The sky was darkening, the sun sliding below the horizon, painting the clouds in muted purples and grays. In the east, the first stars were emerging. Sansa felt the weight of duty, but also a quiet pride that she had come this far. She remembered the frightened girl she had been, spinning dreams of knights and ladies at King's Landing, naive about the cruelty of the world. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman hardened by loss, sharpened by betrayal, but not devoid of hope. She had found a way to unite two great seats of power, Winterfell and the Eyrie, and now she held them both in careful balance. If winter tested her resolve, she would endure it. If the realm tested her cunning, she would rise to the challenge. And if any foe threatened the North or the Vale, they would learn that under Sansa Stark's leadership, these lands would not bend, nor would they break. In the days to come, she would continue her work, forging stronger ties between houses, settling disputes, administering justice. She would remain vigilant, for the alliances she built were made of men and women with their own ambitions. Yet she would not falter. Beneath the watchful eyes of the old gods, she had pledged her life to protect her people. Perhaps, in time, a new legend would be born, of the Lady of the Vale and the North, who brought stability to two realms once scarred by war. And in that legend, maybe the names of the old Starks would echo, standing alongside Sansa Stark, who had defied the tragedies of her youth and risen to stand tall as the cold winds blew. For now, though, she simply stood on the battlements of Winterfell, the swirl of snow around her, wearing the furs of her house and the colors of the Vale. She was Sansa of House Stark, Lady of Winterfell, Lady of the Eyrie, and she would carve a new destiny for the North and the Vale alike. A destiny of strength, unity, and perhaps, if the gods were merciful, peace.